Most photos are forgotten in seconds, but the right shutter speed can turn a snapshot into something people feel. Today, I'll show you how to freeze magic, create motion, and bring your photos to life in ways some beginners never even think about. So let's get into it. What if I told you that the secret to freezing a hummingbird mid-flight, capturing a child at play, creating artistic movement, or painting with light in the dark, all comes down to one simple but crucial setting? Today, I'm unlocking everything you need to know to master shutter speed and really sharpen your photography skills. Shutter speed is the most creative tool in your camera, and today I'll show you how to master it with confidence. And if this is something you're into, don't miss out. I've created an ebook for you with simple, practical tips you can use right away. Yours for free when you sign up for my monthly newsletter, link below. Okay, let's have a look at why mastering shutter speed is such a crucial part of becoming a better photographer. In this video, you'll learn how to hold on to a fleeting moment forever, how to turn movement into art, and how a simple shift in shutter speed can transform ordinary photos into images that feel alive, full of emotion, full of energy and story. You'll learn how to create photos that don't just show what happened, but make people feel it. And stick around, because I'll also be sharing a bonus tip that'll show you how to master long exposure shots even in bright sunshine. Alright, let's start right at the heart of it. What is shutter speed really? Well, simply put, shutter speed controls how long your camera's sensor is exposed to light. It's measured in fractions of a second, like 1/1000th of a second for really fast shutters, or in full seconds if you're going for that beautiful, slow, dreamy look. Imagine this: 1/1000th of a second could freeze a hawk mid-dive. 1 full second of exposure could turn a rushing waterfall into a silky sheet of flowing light. Same scene, completely different mood, just by adjusting how long the shutter stays open. Now, why does this matter so much? Because time and how much of it you allow controls two crucial things. Firstly, it affects how much light hits your camera's sensor. So that's your exposure, how bright or how dark your image is. And secondly, it controls how much motion appears in your photo, whether you totally freeze it or embrace the movement. And to really get this, I like to think about it like a window in a storm. If you open and close the window, snap, just a few drops of rain get in, no time for anything too messy. But if you leave that window open too long, boosh, the whole room gets soaked. Your shutter works the same way. Quick open and close and you freeze a sprinter mid-stride, crystal clear. Leave it open longer and you capture the flow of movement, the story of what's happening, not just the moment itself. I hope that makes sense. And here's a really important point. Shutter speed isn't just technical, it's emotional. Freezing action conveys energy, intensity and excitement, that feeling of a moment suspended in time. But motion blur, done right, that tells a story. It shows the passage of time, the speed of life, the beauty of movement itself. Think of a child spinning in circles, sharp, frozen in time. That's cute. But a slight blur in their arms and hair, then you can feel the laughter and the energy of that moment. So how do you start practicing this? If you want to focus on shutter speed without worrying about the other settings, set your camera to shutter priority mode. That's S mode or TV on some cameras. You get to pick the shutter speed and the camera handles the aperture. Or if you want total control, and honestly, it's a brilliant way to learn, switch to manual mode and balance your shutter speed, aperture and ISO together. Either way, when you start thinking of shutter speed not just as a setting, but as a creative tool to tell stories, everything about your photography begins to shift. Alright, let's move on and look at exactly how shutter speed affects motion and how to use it to your advantage. Now that we understand what shutter speed is, let's talk about one of its biggest superpowers, controlling motion. When you change your shutter speed, you're not just changing how bright your image is, you're changing how movement looks, and this choice can completely transform how people feel when they look at your photos. So, fast shutter speeds, what do? They stop motion completely. Think about a bird taking off, wings outstretched, feathers caught in midair, frozen in a split second, pure energy suspended in time. To freeze that kind of action, you'll want really fast settings. For birds in flight, around 1/2000th of a second. Runners or sports start at 1/1000th of a second. Busy street scenes, something like 1/500th of a second. And what about slow shutter speeds? Well, they do the opposite. They show motion. They turn movement into something artistic, something storytelling. A waterfall, for example, in real life, the water's crashing down, chaotic. But with a shutter speed of 1 or 2 seconds, it turns into this silky, ethereal flow. Or night traffic at 10, 20, even 30 seconds, you don't just see the cars, you see streams of light, like the city itself is breathing. Even ocean waves at around 1/4 of a second to 2 seconds can look dreamy and gentle, like brushstrokes across a painting. So when should you freeze and when should you blur? Well, it comes down to the story you want to tell. If you want energy, clarity, a sharp snapshot of a split second, freeze it. If you want emotion, flow, a sense of passage, embrace the blur. And here's a little secret some beginners miss. Sometimes the best photos aren't all freeze or all blur. It's a bit of both. Like when you pan with a cyclist, tracking them as they race past you. If you shoot at around 1/30th to 1/60th of a second, the cyclist stays sharp, but the background streaks with motion blur and that feeling of speed hits you straight away. Don't take those settings as set in stone though. As with everything in photography, you will need to experiment, but that's after fun. Anyway, that kind of partial blur, partial sharpness is incredibly powerful when you use it intentionally. So how do you pull this off? For anything slower than about 1/60th of a second, you'll need a tripod to keep your camera rock steady, or you'll likely introduce unwanted blur. But if you do want to experiment with handheld, you can master the technique I just mentioned, panning. You move your camera with the subject's motion as you shoot. Takes a bit of practice, but the results can be absolutely incredible. Panning is really popular with my college students. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to cover that in another video. Next up, we'll look at how shutter speed fits into the bigger picture of exposure and why getting the balance right can turn even a simple scene into something magical. Alright, so we know shutter speed controls time and motion, but here's the thing, it's not working alone. It's just one leg of what we call the exposure triangle, along with aperture and ISO. The three of them are constantly dancing together to balance the light that hits your camera sensor. Let's break it down nice and simple. Fast shutter speeds like 1/1000th of a second don't let much light in, so if you're shooting action, like freezing sports or wildlife, you'll probably need to compensate to get a good exposure. You've got two main options. Either open up your aperture, that is, use a wider setting like f2.8 or f4 so more light gets in, or boost your ISO, make your camera more sensitive to light. But be careful, because pushing ISO too high can add noise to your image. On the other hand, slow shutter speeds, let's say 1 second or longer, lets in loads of light. That's great for those dreamy waterfall shots, but if you're not careful, especially in bright daylight, you'll completely overexpose your image. Everything will just turn white. So then, to balance that out, you close down your aperture to a tighter setting like f11 or f16 and drop your ISO as low as it can go, which is generally about 100. The key thing to remember is this. When you change one part of the triangle, whether it's shutter speed, aperture or ISO, you have to adjust at least one of the others to keep a good exposure. You could think of it like a seesaw. Imagine shutter speed sitting on one end and aperture on the other. When you tip one side up, maybe you speed up your aperture. The other side, your aperture, has to open wider to let in more light and stay balanced. An ISO, that's like a little kid in the middle of the seesaw, edging forward or backward, helping adjust the balance as it's needed. So if you need a bit more light, ISO scoots forward to help. And if you want a cleaner, less noisy image, ISO slides back and you need to make up the difference with shutter speed or aperture. And once you see it this way, like a playground of light if you will, balancing your exposure stops feeling like guesswork and starts becoming a bit more natural. And here's something most people don't think of. You're not just balancing light, you're actively balancing creative priorities. If you're going for a fast shutter to freeze motion, that's great, but you might have to sacrifice some depth of field with a wide aperture or deal with a bit more ISO noise. Maybe you want a slow shutter to capture that silky smooth water. Perfect, but you need to control the light carefully. Maybe even add an ND filter to make it work. More about that later. So when you're out shooting, start by asking yourself this. What matters most to me in this shot? Freezing motion, showing motion, depth of field, or keeping noise low? Once you know what you care about most, the rest of the settings fall into place much easier. Coming up next, I'm going to show you how to avoid the most common shutter speed mistakes that catch out some beginners, and show you how to turn them into creative advantages instead. Okay, let's talk about how to avoid one of the most common mistakes that catches out beginner and even intermediate photographers, and that is choosing the wrong shutter speed for your subject or for the shooting conditions. It happens to everyone, especially early on. You think you've nailed a great shot, only to get home, load it up, and realize everything's just a little bit soft. I'm not talking about intentional artistic blur, just slightly out of focus, slightly disappointing. We've all been there, and most of the time it's down to one thing: your shutter speed was too slow for the situation. But here's the good news: there's a simple trick that can save you a lot of frustration. It's called the focal length rule. And this is how it works. When shooting handheld, no tripod, you want your shutter speed to be at least the same number as your focal length. Let me explain. If you're using an 80mm lens, you want a shutter speed of at least 1/80th of a second. With a 200mm lens, then aim for at least 1/200th of a second. Because the longer the lens, the more any tiny movement from your hands will be magnified and exaggerated. However, just to be clear, I would recommend that the slowest shutter speed you should be using for handheld is 1/60th of a second. You may be okay with 1/50th of a second with a 50mm lens, but why risk it? And here's a bit of extra safety you can build in. If you can, add a buffer. If you're using a 50mm lens, instead of barely sitting at 1/60th, bump it up to 1/100th if you can. This gives you a little bit more wiggle room, especially if your subject is moving or if you've had too much coffee. And of course, when you're working in lower light, sunset, indoors, shaded areas, this rule becomes even more important, because if your shutter speed drops too low handheld, it's not just motion blur you're dealing with, it's handshake blur, and that can be really hard to see until it's too late. So remember this simple rule: match your shutter speed to your focal length at the minimum. Add a bit of extra if you can, and you'll instantly improve sharpness without even touching any other settings. Next up, I've got a bonus tip for you that'll show you how to shoot beautiful long exposures even in bright, harsh daylight using a technique most beginners don't know about. Stick around, I think you're going to like it. Alright, you've made it this far, and I promise you a bonus tip. This one can really open up a whole new world of creative shooting, so let's get into it. Have you ever tried to take a long exposure shot in daylight and ended up with just a complete whiteout? You slow the shutter down to 1, 2, 5 seconds to try and get that beautiful silky waterfall or those long city light trails, but your camera just can't handle all that light pouring in. It's like trying to fall asleep with all the lights on. It's just too much. Here's the solution. Use a neutral density filter, or ND filter for short. An ND filter is basically like a pair of sunglasses for your lens. It cuts the amount of light that reaches your sensor without changing colors or sharpness, so you can slow down your shutter and still get a perfect long exposure even under bright midday sun. And they come in different strengths depending on how much light you need to block out. An ND8 blocks about 3 stops of light, great for softening water or slowing down motion slightly. The ND64 blocks about 6 stops, perfect for dreamy waterfalls or slightly longer exposures on brighter days. And the ND1000 blocks a massive 10 stops. This is where you can do those serious long exposures, 30 seconds, a minute or more, right in the middle of the day. And here's how to do it in practice. Set your shot up first. Frame and compose your scene exactly how you want it. Focus your camera before attaching the ND filter, because once it's on, it might be too dark to see clearly through the viewfinder. Switch to manual mode so you have full control over your shutter speed and aperture. Dial in a slow shutter speed, anywhere from 1 second to 30 seconds or longer, depending on the effect you want and the light conditions. Use a tripod, which is absolutely essential, and ideally a remote shutter or maybe the camera's 2-second timer to avoid any shake when you actually press the button. And just imagine the possibilities. You can turn a busy street into an empty, ghostly scene with people blurred away. You can make clouds streak across the sky. You can transform waves from choppy and chaotic to smooth, misty layers of texture. It's one of the most magical transformations you can make in camera. No Photoshop needed, just pure creative control. And once you see what's possible, I guarantee you'll never look at a bright sunny day the same way again. And if you want more tips like this to keep building your confidence and creativity, don't forget to grab your free photography ebook below. It's packed with simple, practical advice you can start using straight away. And if this video helped, give it a like, subscribe, drop me a comment. I'd love to know what kind of shots you're excited to try next. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.